obviously not committing anger or sin, but just as a parent to be able to do that. So that is something that shook the churches. There was an appeal by, ironically, the Freedom of Religion South African NGO, but they were overturned. So that's one or two of the things. And then there's some smaller things, and this I'll just do in a minute or two. There's Jewish cemeteries, there are Islamic or Muslim cemeteries. There's always somebody who's defacing and doing things to the cemeteries and to the stones. There's a lot of that happening. There have been one or two mosques, I must confess, that have been attacked or broken into. One of them even a petrol bomb, you might call it a Molotov cocktail, thrown at them. That happens periodically. Nobody gets hurt, but it's still an expression that is, it's against the law. And then lastly, and this perhaps for me was a little quite shocking, so the reason why I told you about the diverse country, so there's this Muslim family driving home, and a person of a different, both ethnic and religious persuasion drives up behind him and rams into him, because at the back of his car there was a trailer with a goat or two. They were going to celebrate Eid, not Eid Mubarak, the other Eid, Eid al-Adha, I think it's called, and they slaughter, animals. And so, this person couldn't fathom this idea that in their gated complex, this was going to happen. And then the driver actually also went to go and slash his tires, and it was a whole big thing. And it sounds gruesome and graphic, and it is. But the courts, obviously they arrested this man, the police, and the courts upheld this freedom. But that's the kind of thing from, now and again you'll hear about those kinds of isolated incidents. So, in conclusion, just hearing all of that, I would argue there's, as South Africans, I would say, from an institutional point of view, that religious freedom is alive and well. I think among people, so in society, I think we do need to learn a bit more, and I think the word is tolerance, one for another. And maybe to put a Christian element to that, as brothers and sisters of the same God, we owe our brother and sister a modicum of respect. And yeah, as I said, I do think there are sufficient checks and balances between sort of government, judiciary, society. But one or two of these cases you might have thought, I think the judiciary might have overstepped, their mark a little bit, into the home, into the church. There's one or two other cases I didn't cite today, but where they've actually ruled, about same-sex. So same-sex marriage is allowed, but homosexual pastors, practicing, and the courts have ruled into some churches. And so there, I do think there's a little bit of overreach. So sometimes in one or two of the institutions of state, I think there's a little bit of overreach, of that. And the freedom, as I mentioned, of the church itself has perhaps been abused. My charge to you and to my fellow South Africans back home is this. With this religious freedom that we have, I would argue that we as Seventh-day Adventist Christians are not using our freedom of religion strongly enough to use this opportunity to promote the gospel. And I can say that, if I look at my country, South Africa, and the size of our church compared to Zimbabwe, Malawi, Zambia, where the church is thriving, I think we actually, something is holding us back as a church. And I don't know exactly where you are as a church in this country, but you have that freedom, and I would challenge you to use that freedom more vociferously, more passionately, guided by the Holy Spirit, of course. But to use that freedom, I think our time and my time is certainly running out and limited. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm sure there might be some questions, but I'm going to ask you to hold the questions and let us flow with the presentation. Now, this is Sister Yanni. Right that time? Okay, so Sister Yanni's story is remarkable. She grew up Muslim in Nigeria, and I'll let her tell you her story.
Thank you. Happy Sabbath. I'm going to get you to say Happy Sabbath in Yoruba. Can you see me? Can you see me? Yes. Yoruba is one of the languages in Nigeria. Nigeria, West Africa is where I was born. It's where my dad is from. My mom is from Northern Ireland. But I grew up for the first 14 years of my life in Nigeria. I'm one of 4, and I don't know if there was an agreement between my parents, but my first 2 siblings were brought up Christian, like my mom was, and my dad being Muslim. My brother and I were brought up as Muslims. I have to say, growing up in Nigeria, Muslims are not quite portrayed the same as they are in the West. The population, I would say, the distribution of Muslims and Christians in Nigeria is roughly 50-50. So they're both, I don't want to use the word normal, but whoever you meet is either Muslim or a Christian. Within those 2 religions, there is a lot of, like Charles was saying, a lot of indigenous practices, bordering on what some people might call voodoo, some traditional practices which are not based in any faith. But that's more cultural, and I think with all religion all over the world, there are cultural practices that creep into the church or the mosque sometimes that one must guard against. But having said that, growing up in Nigeria, I guess you could be, I was called by some of my friends growing up a born-again Muslim, because I did practice it, and for me it was a faith of peace, which was a big shock to me when I moved to England, and I saw how Islam was portrayed in the news, and I had to ask my auntie who I lived with. I said, well, why are they portraying the Muslims in this way? She was Christian, and she kind of, she didn't give me an answer. But yes, growing up as a Muslim, my understanding was if an ant was going by, you don't even kill the ant. You show mercy to the ant. If it's in the way, you can move the ant out of harm's way. There are 5 pillars of Islam. The first one is article of faith. So that is La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. So there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. So essentially, when you convert to Islam, that is the article of faith you recite. The second is prayer. So there's 5 times a day you pray, and I used to pray 5 times a day. And that also instills a bit of discipline, I found. The third is almsgiving, which is given to the poor. Not quite tithe, but if you want to think of it as tithe, it's like a 2.5% of your earnings to help to look after the mosque and to help the less fortunate in society. The last one is pilgrimage to Mecca. If you are privileged enough to be able to afford it, then you go to Mecca and you observe pilgrimage, but you must make sure that you look after your family you left behind. So you can't save all your money and go and then leave your wife and kids starving at home. That kind of nullifies it. Yeah, so moving to England, I still wish to practice Islam. Oh, sorry, I missed the 4th article, which is fasting in Ramadan, which I used to do as well. When I moved to England, I lived with a Christian family, and it wasn't so easy to practice my faith. I remember the first Ramadan that came, I used to wake up in the night and go and sneak and eat some food. because you eat before sunrise, and then you don't eat all day, and then you break your fast at sunset. I got busted. So yeah, anyways, it wasn't so hard. It's so easy for me to practice my faith, and gradually, I remember actually, I remember going to church once with my uncle and relatives, and the pastor was actually preaching about, standing strong in one's faith and, standing up, whoever felt this way should stand up. And I remember shaking and standing up, but I was in my heart still proclaiming Islam, because for me, the God of Islam and the God of Christianity and the God of Judaism were all the same. It's just different ways of practicing or worshipping. And one of us has got it right, or maybe all of us, we'll find out on Judgment Day. But yes, the main thing I think is having that relationship with him and loving him and loving fellow man, which is what he's asked us to do. I digress. Where was I? I was telling a different story. Hold on. Oh yes, so in church, yes. So I stood up and I was shaking. But in my heart, I was proclaiming that I'm still a Muslim. But nobody else around me, they thought I was proclaiming that I'm moving over to Christianity. There was a period in my life where I wasn't Muslim or wasn't Christian, but I still served and loved God, and I used to speak to him all the time. When I moved to universities, when I first came across Seventh-day Adventists, I had no idea what that was. And actually, after becoming Adventist, is when I found out, oh, they're Adventists in Nigeria. I thought, really? The whole time growing up, I'd never come across one. But the girl I used to sit next to in university, she was Adventist, and she invited me to church a couple of times, which was all right. And my current husband now was in my class, well, my only husband, sorry, my husband Ben. He was Adventist too. So I got to know two Adventists in my first year at university. When we started dating, I have to say, and this I will share as a way of, I guess, getting to know non-Adventists or getting them to, welcoming them into church and the like, is my personal experience. I had almost like a resentment, because I thought, why do they think they're special? Why do they go to church on Saturday? It's no big deal. You can serve God on whatever day. It doesn't have to be, they think they're special, they think they're all righteous and sanctimonious and better than everybody else. And this didn't come from anything that anybody had really said to me, yet I still had that. So much less if we give off the subliminal messages that we are right and we have the truth, and you are all, as a consequence, wrong, and you should know better and come and join us in church, which sometimes we can give off without even thinking. And like I said, in this case, nobody had really said anything like that to me, but I still felt this strong resentment. So then you're now trying to battle through that resentment to get somebody to come to church. But what really got to me, eventually, in the end, was my husband, Ben. I'm emotional now. But he never said a word to me. He just lived the life of a Christian. And his mom as well. And through my resentment, he was just there, and he didn't force anything on me. He didn't ram anything down my throat. But I still had this resentment. And he was just by my side. And I remember a story he told about his mum. I think actually the pastor of his church, of their church in Tottenham, had stolen money, a lot of money. And while naturally, instinctively, there's a lot of, how could he, how dare he, like he's leading us, and a lot of, the pastor's only human. And we must remember to that he is only human, and it's God we follow, not the pastor. So we mustn't lose our way or our faith because a human, be it pastor or an elder or anybody else that invited you to church, whatever they do or say, it's not them that should make you lose your way. Your relationship should always be directly with God. But Ben's mum, out of everybody that was clamoring for his head, and he should be this, he should be that, he should be this, how dare he? Her message was forgiveness and rehabilitation for him, and that, I think that was the beginning of the work in me. And now I'm Adventist. And we got married, and we got 2 boys, and here we are. Any questions? No? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister. All right, time's moving along, and if there are any questions, anyone want to ask specific to the, for example, for the Parkinson. I'm trying not to say Parkinson. I'm sure Bridget would like to know a typical Sabbath day in your experience. How would that start? How would it end? He's calling for help.
So just repeat the question, please. You repeat the question. What is that?
Okay, so typical Sabbath day. How is it prepared for? How is it spent? What do you do? And in terms of your outreach, what kind of programs do you have for young people?
So as Charles said, sorry, I think Yemi has made all of us a little bit emotional, so forgive it. As Charles said, we originally from the Cape, and the Cape, Cape Town, is where a lot of the pioneers in South African Adventism, and especially Adventism of color, began. So we are originally from the Western Cape, and we're very competitive down there, especially in pathfindering. My church was the best church, and he'll tell you that his church was the best church. We'll leave you to decide that. But pathfindering was very popular. But how do we prepare for Sabbath? Let me begin there. I come from a very old school family where my father polishes his shoes to this day on a Friday night. The clothes are ironed before the sun goes down. The food is most of the time cooked before the sun goes down. And we get together as a family to have worship or to invite the Sabbath. And for me, that was one of the most beautiful things, to invite the Sabbath. So much so when I went to other parts of the world and people didn't do that, I thought it was very strange. How can you not invite the Sabbath? Because it's the best day of the week. So we invite the Sabbath. Sabbath is pretty much the way it is here, with the format of the worship, the liturgy. And then I think one other thing we do, and I think what we call it here is Vespers. So, but we would spend a lot of time outdoors in nature. So Sabbaths, a lot of Sabbath is spent outdoors in nature, not necessarily in the church building. And we would, again, culturally very different to here, we would get out of our church clothes as soon as we can, so that we can be in clothes that are more comfortable. So when I first moved to the Cayman Islands, I thought it was very strange that we wear our church clothes all day long. And we take our church clothes, we even go to Hurley's and Kirk's in our church clothes. You'll see the Adventists roaming around in the shopping malls with their church clothes. So in that way, so what we would also do at the end of Sabbath is close Sabbath together. And that wouldn't necessarily be a Vespers service in church. It would be wherever we are. It would be wherever we are. So the closing of Sabbath wouldn't be limited to a building. We would be outside, we'd be out at the beach and we'd gather in a circle and we'd close Sabbath, or we'd be at somebody's house, or we'd be in a parking lot. It would be anywhere, but we'd always mark the end of Sabbath and the beginning of Sabbath. I don't know if that answers the question.
I'll just add two little bits from our pathfinding and youth days. So yes, we were a superior Pathfinder club. But besides that, we spent a lot of time, this is my memories, of going on the trains, you know. So we'd have this, I think we call it train evangelism. And we'd, you know, hop on the train wherever, well, our church, and go all the way to the city center and, you know, sing along, you know, in the trains. One of us, one or two of us would sort of, you know, do a short, not sermon, but a short sort of charge in the carriage, and then handing out tracts, as we call them. You know, just literature, basically. And then we got to the CBD, the central, you know, the city. We do more of the same, but, you know, up, you know, through the streets. We did that, you know, a good couple of times a year, and similarly, you know, as youth as well, we did similar things. As Pathfinders also, we had a Pathfinder band, and, you know, quite regularly throughout the year, you would march through the streets of our local town and do that kind of thing. Going to visit, you know, senior citizen homes, hospitals, all that kind of thing. There was a lot of that was pathfinding. And then youth, you were a youth leader. Yeah, it's very similar, but just, you know, obviously it is perhaps a bit more sophisticated as you get a little older, you know, where you're taking the lead as a young person. But there was very much, I would call it traditional missionary, you know, kind of work. Is what we grew up with. And even maybe one other thing that I remember was harvesting gathering. We did that as Pathfinders as well. I don't know if it's a global, it's just South Africa, but we don't do it as a church. But that was something that we had to face the dogs, you know, going to knock on doors for Meals on Wheels. Yeah.
Yeah, just a question again to Charles. It's Charles. I had the privilege to go to South Africa a few years ago. I was in Cape Town, Johannesburg, Pretoria. Very fascinating country. Great experience. One of the things that I was very careful to observe was the South African history of apartheid separated the peoples. And we were looking keenly to see to what extent they had come back together, or they were making efforts at integration post the ending of apartheid. And we saw some of that. We saw some of it. In fact, we didn't see, well, personally, I don't know if the hosts were careful to take us to some places, but we didn't see any evidence of segregation and all of that. And I'm asking now, is this the true impression? Is it that the church is much more integrated now than it used to be some years ago? Or is that just a facade?
Are you doing with the Seventh Adventist Church, or?
Yes, Adventist.
And by all means, yeah. Yeah. So it started in the, so funny enough, my father happens to be a pastor as well. And he was elected to the union as a secretary, and his job in 1990, that first 4 years, their job was to, I'm going to answer it in two ways, institutionally and then sort of, you know, us, the laity, I guess. So his job was to integrate the union, so to dissolve, you know, some of the other conferences and to join the union and make sure that it was representative. So the institutions that are governed by that union, the college, the seminary, what is it? A couple of the schools, a couple of the institutions, and then of course at the union level. So that was, funny enough, that was achieved. I think it's almost a little easier to do it at that level, at the institutional level. At the conference level, so the local conference level, that took a much longer. I'm just thinking about the conference that I grew up in, and then I'll reflect on the one which I'm based in now. That conference had the Cape, what's called the Cape Conference now. It went through 2 iterations. I think they went through 3 votes, so 3 sessions before they eventually got to the point where there was a meeting of the minds, between people and just to put racism aside, right? Whatever reasons people might have, you can't read it in people's minds, but there are real difficult issues to deal with around ownership, so it's assets, church buildings, that kind of thing. And then the big thing then was also the disparity in pay. So a white pastor would receive 30-40% more than his counterpart in the previous black. So there were 3 conferences that had to merge in my conference. It was a black conference, it was a mixed ethnic origin conference, which is where I was from, and there was a white conference, and these 3 had to merge. And really it was about money. So who gets to own these assets, and then how are we going to create sort of parity for our workers, basically for the workers. So those are the big things really. It's really about, to be honest, it's about rands and cents, our currency. Dollars and dimes. So that took at least 3 sessions for that conference. In my conference up north now, it was historically, it's the richest conference. It's kind of where all the gold and diamonds were. So it's the richest sort of region. Gauteng, Johannesburg, you might know that name. So it's integrated, I would say, at an institutional level. Sorry, not at institutional. It's integrated within that conference, I would say, in a sort of geospatial kind of way. However, there are 2 or 3 other conferences that have coterminous areas which they mission. So they're not separated fields in that sense. There's 2 or 3 conferences: the Orange Transvaal Conference and the Northern Conference. They share territory, but just have different churches, basically. So that's kind of like what they have in the States, the regional conferences versus the state conferences. A very similar idea. So in that sense, institutionally, at the local level, there is still some disparity, because the Orange Transvaal Conference is the black conference. The other conference is a mixed conference, so it's white, black, and mixed, and Indian as well. That's the 4th sort of major ethnic group in South Africa. However, so there's again, sort of the institutional integration. But at a local level, so at a local level in my very local church, so we attended what was historically a white church. So we joined there, and we had challenges. I love all my brothers and sisters in that church, and we've worked hard with my brothers and sisters, and we shed tears, and we had fights together. But that's the last part of my answer at a very local church level. What you see, if you look at, say, if this is the church, you'll see sort of 50%, one shade, and another 50% the other shade. They might sit in slightly different parts of the church. They sit, they sing a little bit and they move a little bit differently, and they kind of look okay. But underneath that, I guess at a board level and at a nominating committee level, that's where you see, the real, and that's where we did some battle. And I would say we were blessed with a pastor, a young white male pastor, who was visionary and who could see beyond, race. And I think it's those kinds of people. I think my point is this: those kind of people are the younger people who are bringing through that change. I think for the last 20 odd years, there's been sort of this broader undercurrents that are moving, but now at a me and you, a brother and a sister level, I think that's where the challenge is right now, and where there is some grounds being made. Maybe one last point, just to go back to our churches back in the Western Cape, where the demography is more mixed ethnic origin and black. It's a lot easier mixing those churches. It's just, I don't know, it just seems to work better. My church is certainly that way. We've been like that. So our church is located on a major school, a boarding school, and it's always been that way for 30, 40 years. And we even have, so we've got refugees from Somalia, what's this other country, Burundi. We've also joined, lots of people in Cape Town, and they've joined our churches, and we've created space for every particular kind. So it's leadership, maybe that's the point. It's leadership that really makes a difference at a local church level as to how those changes will happen. And of course, that leadership needs to be reflected at the Exco and influence, the conference to make these kinds of changes that need to happen so that we can, I'd say, worship in truth and faith.
But to answer your question a little bit more directly, Pastor Ivor, or Pastor Harry, your guide probably did try hard to not show you the segregation because
I'm thinking that.
It's still there. It's still there. It's there in, maybe not so much in the church, but the traditional areas that were Indian or white or black or mixed still are traditionally that. And it's the younger generation that are choosing to buy in areas that are more inclusive and not traditionally one race group. So it is happening, but it's happening slowly.
Good evening, everyone. I want to thank all of you for sharing. I have a question for the young lady from Nigeria. Since you have a Muslim background, I have been to Mozambique on a mission trip with Maranatha, where we went there to build schools and we built 3 churches, 3 small churches. From my experience, from my short experience there, I noticed that the Muslim community seemed to share a greater social responsibility with the community than the Christian community. And for that reason, you had more the young people, more people drawn to the Muslim faith there. And what was regarded as Christianity in most instances was Catholicism. There's more Catholics than Adventism. So I'm wondering if that is the same experience that you have in Nigeria, and because when I look at the newer buildings that were built, for instance, in the Muslim community, they were shiny temples and they were all clean and they were all seemed to be well kept. And what we were doing, even from Adventism, was some small little churches, but the Muslim temples were at their domes with their golden crescent, and there were a lot of them. Is that the same experience that you have in Nigeria, where persons are drawn to the Muslim faith because of their greater social responsibility to the community than the Christians?
I didn't personally experience or notice that. Like I said, it's like a 50-50 split. So you're either Muslim or you're Christian, and it's all normal, and it's all good with everybody. The parts of Nigeria where there are and have been conflicts with the Muslims is the north. The Boko Haram is in the north, and in all things, it's always the extremists that give people problems. So, like I said, my experience of Islam was a peaceful religion. That's what I knew. The extremists, and the other thing as well was that you cannot force a person to Islam. You cannot, you must not. It nullifies everything you're doing. They must come willingly. Whereas Boko Haram is killing people, and it's terrorism in the name of Islam, which has got nothing to do with it. Some would argue that jihad, which we all know, jihad, yeah, let's go and kill everybody, and that's not Muslims and all that. Some of the Muslim scholars actually say that jihad is really the struggle within us between good and evil. It's not about the evil people are the non-Muslims and let's go kill them if they won't convert, because you're not supposed to convert by force. So I think both Muslims and Christians did their bit, from my perspective growing up, equally, because the distribution was pretty much equal. So, and it wasn't, in terms of religious liberties, for me growing up, it wasn't, oh, you're Christian, you must be Muslim. I used to go to church because my mum was Christian. She died when I was 2, but I had relatives, family friends that were Christian, and I would go to church with them. Well, they didn't come to the mosque with me, actually, now I think about it. But yeah, it was free, and it was, my relationship with God was mine, and it didn't matter if I was in a Christian house or a Muslim house. It was all good.
Well, one of the points that I wanted to ask, is it that we are from your experience, as you said you were there, you left there when you were 14, but if you could remember, is it that the Muslim society seemed to have a greater social impact on the community? They were more giving, they tend to invest more. I don't know if it's Africa, but when I see them building, what I see, their mosques are shiny and bright and well painted.
It wasn't like that where I lived anyway. Certainly where I lived, I didn't live in an affluent area. So I remember going to mosque with my dad, and I can't actually tell you what the building looked like. It was just, I don't want to say run down, but it was just a building, just on the side of a dirt road. It wasn't majestic. Now, if you look on YouTube, Abuja, the capital, if you look on YouTube, you will see grand mosques, the type of which you're describing. But that is in an affluent place. So I guess like the Catholic Church has lots of majestic buildings. They invest a lot, and there's gold statues and stuff. It's, I guess the more affluent areas had those more symbolic buildings that are more grand. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
One question. How easy it would be for you to change from a Muslim to a Christian?
No problem at all. For me, again, and I guess everybody's family life is different. For me, like I said, I toyed with Judaism at one point, because like my understanding or my belief was God in heaven. I found it hard to grasp the idea of God being 3 in 1, because in Islam there's only one God, there's just one God, Allah, which is the Arabic name for God. How can God be 3 people? That I really struggled with for many years. But God impressed upon me an understanding which helped me to become Christian eventually. But for me, as growing up, I would have felt more like I was disappointing my father, I guess. But if God impressed upon my heart, it would have, that's it. When God speaks to you, listen. But there are, I'm sure, other families that it would, again, it boils down to be the traditional family and the individual setting. It might have been harder for a person to change, but thankfully my family wasn't like that. I already had 2 siblings that were Christian anyway, so it would have been easy for me, maybe less so for others.
Any more questions?
I've got a general comment for Idiona and Charles, and then a question for, I guess, both of them. So, like Pastor Harry, I've had the privilege of going to South Africa but I went a long time ago when apartheid had just been dismantled. So it was literally like a year or two after that happened. So just from my observation, we weren't there very long, but we went again to do some youth work over there. I think we were going to a Adventist Youth Congress. But we stayed in the townships with local Adventist young people. So they would describe to us what was happening and what used to happen at the time. So one of the things I remember vividly was when we were driving at night, the person that we were staying with was a young teacher. She was maybe in her 20s. And she would put a cap on so that she looked like a man when we were driving, because it was a bunch of women or girls in the car. And every time she got to a stoplight, she would just keep driving through the red light. So we're like, "Why are you breaking the law, girl? What are you driving through a red light for?" And she said, if we stop, somebody could carjack us. So we have to drive through the red light so that we don't have the opportunity for someone to just rip open the door and kidnap us or take the car. And I wear this cap so that I look like a man, so that they don't know that it's only women who are driving in the car. And she described some of the violence that happened in the township, like she was talking about going to the supermarket. But for them, it was so ingrained and so frequent that it was just a fact. These are just things that happen. So, you know, down the road, that person's been sexually attacked last week, and so what? But for them, because we mainly went to the black churches, but we also went to mixed churches as well. And what I found so striking was the total love that the people had who were oppressed by apartheid. So I went there because my dad's a bit of a black militant, Black Panther. I went there thinking if I was in South Africa and I was black and I grew up in that system, the minute Nelson Mandela became president, I'll be killing all the white people because you lot oppressed us. But when we got there, we were like, why are you not killing all the white people? We were black British and we have racism in England and it's nothing like what they experienced, and we were puzzled. Why is it that you all haven't had a mutiny and just burnt down the whole country? And they said, we're not going to do that. We just want to reconcile. And we're like, what? And they said, no, God's love is greater than any suffering that we have had. And as a people, we want to move forward with everybody. We want them to be our brothers and sisters, and we don't want to hurt anyone. And we're like, okay. But their genuine love for God was so astounding, and their capacity for forgiveness, which is what Yemi was talking about, was unimaginable, because like I said, the horrors that people went through, we couldn't even begin to comprehend. So I was extremely touched by especially the ethnic minorities in South Africa and the fact that they were the majority, and they could have done what the Trumpites have done. They could have stormed the capital and burnt down the place, and you know, what happened in Zimbabwe, they didn't do that. They just said, let's work together, let's love together, even though you have more than me, even though you've oppressed me, even though last week you wanted to hurt me, I'm going to love you regardless of what has happened. So it was just astounding to me that as a nation, they were able to heal in that way. So my other question is more to maybe to all three of them, because I think maybe in the Caribbean, in some islands, we're more sheltered because our nations are predominantly Christian. So for the three of you, I just wanted to find out, how can we, as Adventist Christians living in Cayman, educate ourselves better about other faiths and other religions, whether it's Islam or Judaism, so that when we encounter people of those faiths, we don't come off superior, we don't come off as we're better than you, and we don't alienate people because we don't have an understanding of their faith. So that's for all three of you.
It's a very difficult question, but I've only been here for 6 months. So I'm a little, sort of fresh off the boat. I'll speak just a minute or two about, or a sentence or two about my impressions of this island. I don't know the Caribbean that well. I would say that I think the challenge we have here as a Christian church and the Seventh-day Adventist Church is one of how to engage the secular postmodern mind. I don't think it's that much that we have, faiths, all, range of different faiths. It's more that we have and I think they call it a captive in markets. I'm playing a bit on words there, but you have all these people working, in the financial industry, and they lean more towards the secular postmodernism. And I think if we stepped outside of our Christian mindset and we found ways to think about how to engage people where they're at, their mindsets, I think that might be the challenge for this island, just as an outsider's view.
It is a very difficult question. But in my own experience, I think I'm working in a very postmodern mindset company. And I did before as well. And I think I can say that I do have friends that are even unchurched. And I think the only way to reach unchurched people is to not go out and want to grab them and want to baptize them. You can want to do that, but you cannot come across that way. I think Christians, we have a way of speaking our own language. They say we speak Christianese, and I think sometimes we do speak Christianese. If you're speaking to somebody who is totally unchurched, and you're telling them about the blood of Jesus, or the blood that covers me, or what's one of my favorite songs? There is a fountain filled with blood that flows from Emmanuel's veins. It sounds like a horror movie. And I think it's very difficult to break it down as a church, but I think we should. I think we should start the dialogues. But I think as an individual, you have to be Spirit-led and ask for the Spirit to lead you. Because there is a way that you can reach your friend in a way that you maybe won't reach a Christian friend or a friend that believes in some sort of God. But I do believe that the gospel can be broken down and has to be broken down, because somebody I know says the gospel is not Christian. And it's true, the gospel is not Christian. The gospel is the good news of Jesus Christ. And Jesus Christ is John 3 verse 16. For God so loved the world, not the Adventists, not the Baptists, the world, even the Hindus. And I think one other thing is don't be afraid of other people and of other faiths. Don't be afraid of people that are wealthy. Don't be afraid of people that worship in a temple where they've got many arms, like the Hindus. Don't be afraid of saying things that are wrong. Reach out to people and be reachable to people. And at the end of the day, I know it's a cliche, but everybody just wants to be loved and wants to be seen. And if you are Spirit-led, and I think the Lord will grant those opportunities to us. But I think we need to stop being afraid, and we need to stop being so stuck in our ways. You need to be open for the Spirit to work through you. And yeah.
Very good.
I'm going to lean in. Some of what Idiona said it resounds with me.
Just a moment, please. Brethren, can we just settle down, please? The little ones I know are down with us now. Can we just settle down quick? Thank you.
I think sometimes, especially the unchurched, like Idiona said, we have to be careful of not being defensive should they ever ask us about our faith. I feel like we might feel like, oh, we've got to get this right. We've got to answer all the right way. And sometimes we can come across as being combative or defensive or righteously right, and this is the way, and this is it, and so sure of ourselves, which can be off-putting to people. So like Idiona said, if we're Spirit-led, and it's different for everybody, and everybody's gift is different. But I think, for me, it's just trying to what do they say? You are the only Bible some people will get to read. It's just living that life that God has asked us to live, being peaceful, being kind, being loving, meeting them where they are, where their needs are, and not necessarily even having to utter the name of Jesus, but also pray that God touches them and God uses you to meet them in His time. Because it's really God that touches the hearts of people, that softens their hearts and opens their minds to Him. So to pray that God uses you to be there, if it's His will, for when He does that, and gives you the words and the wisdom and the right tone and manner and everything that you need to just fill the gap when God moves. As opposed to us trying to do it of our own strength and okay, we have to reach people, it's our mission. And yes, it is, but let God lead, I think.
Okay. Any more questions? Don't be shy. Folks are quite happy to give you the insight. And this might be the closest you get to Africa. So use the opportunity to find out exactly. So
I don't know if I'm putting Debbie Peart. I don't know if I'm putting you on the spot, but I know you've had some kind of exposure to working with persons who are different, a different faith. What has that experience been for you as a Seventh-day Adventist?
Yes, thank you for putting me on the spot, Pastor. Some of you may know I was actually in Kenya for the past 9 years. I just got back home. I found some of what you said in the community where I was in the country, it was mostly 50-50. A lot of the families, the Christian families that I lived with, some of their parents or their grandparents were Muslim, but maybe the younger generations were Catholic. So we would get together for family gatherings, and it was accepted. Certain members of the family didn't eat certain things, or certain members of the family did things this way, and it was accepted. So where I lived, I didn't actually have a problem as far as everyone joining together. What Elder, you asked about the social part of the two religions. And yes, I must say the Muslims tend to be more giving than the Christians. And I lump all the Christians together, even though Catholicism was number one. But you tend to find that, especially during the, or right after, like Eid you mentioned, where it's right after their Ramadan, which is their fasting time. Sometimes I wonder if us Christians could fast like the Muslims do. Basically, it's all-day fasting. You eat a little right before the day starts, nothing at all during the day, and then you eat at sunset when it's finished. And sometimes I held you in high regard that sometimes us as Christians couldn't fast like that. But they especially had a time after that they went into the communities in a way of celebrating. And it was like how a Christian would celebrate Easter or Christmas, our high days. But they did it on this grand scale, and they gave so much into the communities. They gave food, to anyone. You didn't have to be a Muslim. And their food's really good, okay? I mean, really good food, really good vegetarian food. And they really gave, and they were really social. And to our detriment, actually, as Christians, that drew a lot of Christian young people to that faith. You have a problem with Boko Haram in Nigeria. In Kenya, we have a problem with Al-Shabaab. It's just another break-off of this whole terrorist thing. And you are right in saying a true Muslim would never do the things that the terrorists are doing. Like I said, I've lived with them, I've ate with them. The only thing I didn't do was go to mosque. But knowing what they believe, it really, truly is a peaceful religion. But unfortunately, all we get to see is what we see on TV. We had very bad experiences in Kenya as far, I don't know why I sound nervous. When it came to terrorism, it was all over the news a few years ago with Westgate in Nairobi. I think it was Saturday. We went in. I was safe because where I was in the capital was like 8 hours drive from the capital. So I was okay in the country. But I knew people that lived there in the city, so it was quite, unsettling, and everything was on TV. Everyone's in a big mall, huge mall, right in the center of CBD, in the central business district of Nairobi. And the terrorists came in and just started shooting everyone. And so that was one real incident. And the thing that makes a terrorist, a fundamentalist, different from the Muslims is that they'll kill anyone. They don't care if you're Muslim. They'll just literally just kill randomly. And so, Hindus were killed, Christians were killed, their own Muslims were killed. Another incident in a border town where they went into one of our universities at night and killed over 300 of our university students, just shot them. It was really bad. Another incident, teachers refused to go to teach in these areas. And the teachers' union actually had to force teachers to go up there. No one wanted to go and teach in those areas. And school year was starting, and they took them all on buses to go to these areas. And Al-Shabaab stopped the buses and forced everyone off. Well, what they did, they came on the bus and they said, who is Christian and who is Muslim? And, you raise your hand, and they started pulling the Christians off and just shooting them right outside the bus. And it finally got to a point where the Muslim teachers defended the Christian teachers. And they said, no, no, no. And they literally stood up and refused to let anyone get off the bus. So they saved the life of some of their colleagues by doing that. That happened about twice. During Christmas and Easter, of course, the high times in a Christian faith, you were afraid to go to church. A couple of years, I actually didn't go to the big celebrations because I was afraid. You would be in church, worshiping God, and then all of a sudden the door busts open and, they come in and shoot you. So there were times that you were afraid to go. But then again, it was the extremist people that did that. But when you're living in that kind of society, I had friends in every religion. I did have Hindu friends and Muslim friends and, Buddhist friends. And it is just find a common ground. Find a common ground. And everyone has a need You know, everyone wants someone to talk to. And yeah, let's stop cramming Christianity down their throats. You know, let's meet. There's a lot of things that we have in common in each one of our religions. Let's meet on those common grounds. I think it's Mark Finley, or one of our big famous Adventist guys. I think it's Mark Finley. He wrote a book, and it brings in, like, how do you talk to other religions, and the things that they believe, and how we can meet them on those levels. So that's what I would say. Don't be afraid. Yeah, we are very afraid as Christians to go out and evangelize. Yeah, we don't need to know everything, just to be available. And the Holy Spirit leads. The Holy Spirit leads.
Amen. Excellent. I don't want to dominate, but I'm really impressed by some things I'm hearing this afternoon from all the presenters and from what Sister Angie said. And it's almost like Seventh-day Adventists sometimes believe that if we get too close to other people, we're going to erase the influence we have in reaching them with the gospel. So almost like we were told when we were growing up, be careful what kind of friends you make. Don't get too close to the Catholics, because we enjoyed preaching against the Catholics, and so on. So when we're now at a time when I think the church is preaching, or the church is teaching more inclusivity, where we find a way to get close to persons and to allow our friendship and our kindness and our compassion and willingness to assist to be the wedge, the entering wedge into having deeper conversations with them on faith. So living here in the Cayman Islands, we have all kinds of nationalities and cultures and so on. And our church is not as integrated as the island is. Or it's not as, integrated is another word. We're not as multicultural as Adventists as the Cayman Islands, the country, is. And I believe that that's a challenge for us. I think that we have got to find a way to open our doors and put up the welcome signs on the outside and not on the inside, so that folk can see from afar that this is a place that welcomes people without discrimination. People of all faiths and people of all races and ethnicities, and people. Just be willing to welcome people from wherever they are. There is something called incarnational ministry, which is fundamental to evangelism today. Jesus Christ demonstrated it in Philippians chapter 2. The Bible says he came and became like us. He became like us. Christ was not a superhuman. Christ was a human just like you and me. Ellen White says he could have sinned, subject to sin. But he chose to be like us and then to live out the power of the gospel in his life, demonstrating to us that it is possible that we can do the same. I remember some years ago when I worked as a youth director. I said this at an assignment I had recently. When I worked as youth director in Jamaica, we were doing well at our functions. We had nice attendances and so on, but we were losing our young people rapidly. I remember once I was invited to attend a New Year's Eve Christian thing. All the churches in the area were having it, and they came and invited the Seventh-day Adventists as well. And so all our young peoples were there, our Adventist youth and Baptists and Pentecostals and everybody, welcoming in the new year with a gospel explosion. We decided to go because we were always skipping it. So we went this time. And I was there with the other pastors standing up there. And I realized that we didn't fit in. And it was not for a good reason. You see, there are some things that we should not fit in with. But on this particular occasion, we were just too uptight. We were afraid to relax. We were afraid to talk to the people. We were afraid to sing a chorus and clap our hands because we didn't want to appear less Adventist. And it was disturbing to some extent. And it was an alarm bell for me that we needed to teach our people that evangelism fundamentally calls for selflessness. Less concern about self and what self tells you you ought to be, and more concern about the people we're trying to evangelize. So I should be more concerned about how do I effectively reach this man or this woman than I should be concerned about what it would do to me, what it would do to my image. It's not about image. If it was about image, Christ would not have come and died for us because we were not worth it, at least not in our own sight. But somehow when Jesus looked at us, he saw that as worthless as we were, it was worth the investment of his life. I think we've got to get to the place where we are more inclusive. And that's what I heard coming out in all the presentations, that other people have learned it and we are taking too long to get it. It will not damage your faith in God if you open up a little and get to know other people. Because the only way you can bring them to Christ is if they trust you enough to follow you and follow your religion. Yeah, let me leave it there. Okay. No.
Good afternoon again. And to Sister Debbie's point, and a follow up from what I was saying. And the reason why I asked that question, my friend, was from a conversation that I had with a Seventh-day Adventist pastor in the city of Shai in Mozambique. That pastor had 37 churches. He was a pastor for the whole entire city. There was only one pastor in a whole entire city. And there were pastors with more. He was a lucky pastor. There was pastors with more. And one of the sentiment that he said was regularly expressed to him by the people is, why should they come and worship a God under a tree, under a cashew tree? There are a lot of cashew trees in Mozambique, and that's where they worship. The cashew trees grow big, and they worship under the cashew trees. When the Muslims have these nice mosques, and they were so more socially involved. And I am saying, even to us as Seventh-day Adventists over here, we are not realizing what is happening in the other parts of the world, where it seems good. We have one pastor to our one church. And if we're saying it's one message, it's one faith, we teach the same thing everywhere. But when you go to those countries, it don't seem that way. It don't seem that way. Just to show the disparity again, I was in Brazil, in Belém. We were doing some churches again down there. And what they got for quarterlies was printout of pages. It's the same quarterly, but it was printout of pages. We have colored quarterly and we can throw them away. We have more than what we need. So when you see in some countries where the Muslims are getting more socially involved. The people are more drawn to them. They are drawn to them. And we are saying that we need to win them, but all our resources are being spent here in the western part of the world. When you look at some churches, I look at the church that Doug Batchelor has in Sacramento. You have a youth pastor, you have an associate pastor, you have a pastor for this, you have a pastor for that. One church have all 4 or 5 pastors, and then you have countries that one pastor serving a whole entire city. It cannot be the same, it's not equal. And we preach that it is equal, it's not equal. Until we started to really practice what we preach everywhere, not just some places, everywhere, then we may see a difference, because the Muslim society, they are pumping money in these African countries. They are pumping their resources in there. They are telling the disenfranchised African that we, the Muslim, care for you. We care for you. So we should not be surprised when we see they are able to infiltrate and radicalize them and say the Western world don't like you, because all that they do, they hurt you. And they have evidence to show that under the name of Christianity, the Western European people, Christian people. And the thing about it, brethren, when we talk about Christianity in those far eastern countries, they're not looking at Adventism. They're bundling everybody together and saying that you're one. And when they're saying that you're one, they're saying that you're Catholic. They're mostly saying that you're Catholic. They're not saying that you're Adventist. Christianity to them mean Catholicism. And sometimes we want to think that is different. That's what it means to them. Whenever I talk to them, wherever I go, Christianity means Catholicism. And they have evidence to show what under the banner of Christianity they have done. I believe, Pastor, we as Adventists can do more. We can do more socially, and then it will have a better effect on what is happening out there in the rest of those other regions. Thank you.
Okay.
This was just a quick question to the teachers, because I've seen quite a few teachers here. Miss Trail, hi. I wanted to find out, how do we, as an Adventist or Christian community, how do we train our children in their faith but still allow them to appreciate other faiths, other religions and other cultures? And the fact now is that the world is a totally different place. So Charles mentioned about the Bill of Rights, we have the Constitution here in Cayman. So everything is different in terms of what the kids are seeing as acceptable. So there are things that are now incorporated in even children's programs that 20 years ago would have been unheard of, even in commercials. So how do we teach our children to appreciate who they are, respect other people, but still keep their faith? Miss Trell.
Okay, I'll give an example of teaching Bible and having to teach about the different types of food, clean and unclean. I prayed about it, number one. Then secondly, I decided to use the Bible as my guide and not just what I thought, to just put up some bullet points to say, these are the things we should eat, these are the things we shouldn't eat. And you start from a basic point of just general health before getting into clean and unclean. Then we went to the Bible verses, and I placed them in different groups for them to look as to what the Bible said are the characteristics of clean animals, whether it's sea animal, land animal, birds. And they came up with it. And the non-Adventists are those who would eat unclean food. I was like, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. And they would sigh and everything. But I would tell them, though, the other students, that even though persons will continue to eat, now that you have the truth, now that you see it from the Bible, and they always know whatever the Bible says is coming from God, it's what we should live by, then therefore you have to make a choice. It boils down to a choice. And when it came to testing, we had to do a little test. A boy, he wrote, I don't eat this yet. I'm still eating this, but it is unclean. So the message is there, but you also teach them tolerance, that you may see people eating these foods. That doesn't mean that God doesn't love them, but this is what the Bible says. So tolerance is there to teach them to love each other, to respect each other. And you'll find that the non-Christians, you teach them that they have a choice. Now that you have seen the truth, you have a choice. And some will go home and tell their parents they no longer want to eat this or that. But I always tell them, if you're going to tell your parents that, show them the Bible verse. It's not coming from Israel, show them the Bible verse. So that's the basis of teaching students truth. You have to teach them love, you have to teach them respect, and also teach them they have a choice that they have to make, and the people make choices too. So it's either for God or against God, but love should be the fundamental reason for everything. So that is one way of tackling it, and to be sensitive to. You know, different homes, different lifestyles. There are certain topics that you're going to talk about, and you know that a child is in that situation that we would see as not morally right. You have to tread very softly on that and try to use words and to think about how you phrase things so it doesn't offend students who may be in that situation. And also to teach children to respect others of different views. It takes a lot. It's something you have to really pray about, and you have to be intentional about how you say things, when you say things, okay? So that's how I have approached it.
Okay, thank
you. I heard Pastor suggest that we, here on the Cayman Islands, we have people from all across the nation here. One of my deepest problems is whenever we have like campaign, crusades and all of that, I notice that the only Bible workers that we use is people from certain part of our territory. So I want to know, how are we going to reach these people who are from other places where we doesn't have Bible workers, anybody to approach these people to let them know what is going on in our corner of the world?
Yeah. No, I said she answered it earlier about us not being afraid, not being afraid of people. You know, one of the challenges we have right now in this conference, and it's one of the things that is dividing us, is the argument about not reaching Caymanians. That's a big thing. I mean, I came here and met it, and it continues to rage. And then what is the qualification for reaching Caymanians? We almost seem to suggest that only Caymanians can reach Caymanians. And Sister Marilda's right there, and you know that that's not true. Who reaches Caymanians with the gospel are those who are in the hands of the Spirit of God and who allow themselves to be led by Him. All you need to do is look at the Apostle Paul. Paul was mixed up. I mean, he had all kinds of little traces here and there. But Paul was essentially a Jew. And he was the most effective evangelist to the Gentiles. He broke cultural barriers, he broke ethnic barriers, he broke all kinds of barriers, and he reached them with the gospel, not because he didn't work for himself. He was led by the Spirit of God. And I think that one of the things that we are afraid to do is to truly allow ourselves to be led by the Spirit of God. Once we are led by God, we will not be afraid to approach people who are different than we are, different from us. You'll not be afraid to go, for instance, you know, and I like the way Sister Angie said it. When I was growing up in my country, in Guyana. We were British Guyana at the time. So we had the white British and the natives, mostly Indians and Africans. And there was this clear disparity between the races. We grew up thinking that we were inferior because that was the narrative that was out there. But it wasn't an aggressive it wasn't an ugly kind of inferiority. It was just like a passive inferiority complex where nobody was beating anybody and punishing anybody because they were different. But we just knew it in our minds that we were not the same and we were less than they were. That's how it was in our minds. We had to unlearn that years after. And because of that, for a large part of my early life, I didn't feel that I could approach white people and talk to them. I'm talking reality now. Yeah, you used to feel you had a complex. And you felt that, boy, you know, if a white person came into the room, everyone got silent. And you didn't feel that you could just socially mix with them. One of the advantages we have in Cayman is that is a myth that has gone through the window. We all live and work together. I have white persons living close to me, my neighbors, that I stop and chat with, and they with me. And we quickly discover that we're all people. And sometimes you have more to give them than they have to give you. We've got to get over the complex thing. And I found that the closer I have gotten to God, it is the less intimidated I feel about people. I don't feel that anybody is better than me. I don't know if you feel that way, but I don't feel that I'm better than anyone either. There's a courage that God gives you, a boldness that God gives you, that once He presents the opportunity for you to speak for Him, you will speak. But we've got to get close to Him. He is the source of power. When we try to manufacture our own methods for doing this thing, we fail. When we do it the way God has prescribed. And I said to you this morning in the sermon that Ellen White says in the book Ministry of Healing, she says Jesus' method, Christ's method, is the only guaranteed method for success in this work. It is not what, with respect, Pastor Mark Finley comes up with, or what Dr. Wilson comes up with, or what any one of us can create. Jesus' method, very simple. Read it in the Bible. She says, He met the people where they were. He befriended them. He discovered what their needs were. He showed empathy, and He met their needs as best as He could. And it is not until He had convinced them that He could be trusted that He said to them, come follow me. What we try to do is these psychological escapades where we go out there and we try to psych people into the church. We beat them, we make them so guilty and feel so wretched that the church becomes the only sanctuary for them. We've got to change our methods. And the formula is to get to know Christ. Christ gives us power over every intimidating situation that we can face in this life. So I'm challenging us, brethren. This religious liberty discussion we're having now is exposing us to how other cultures are and the need to drop our biases, drop our prejudices, stop thinking that we're better than people, and allow ourselves to be used by God to bring others to Him. It's not going to happen overnight, but the closer you get to Christ. As the song says, you know me and my little secular thing, I always go off with that. The closer I get to you, the more you make me feel. Just take the man or woman out of your mind and substitute it with God. The closer we get to God, it is the more convinced we'll become that he belongs to us and we belong to him. Let us practice getting close to God.
Right. I think we're good for time. So, I'm going to ask Brother Charles. So, I've always in my mind envisioned a Sabbath in the, like, way in the rural parts of Africa. You know, like no lights, dirt road, huts, because I'm sure those still exist. I've always, in my mind's eye, been interested in what does the music sound like on a Sabbath in those hills, in those rural parts. Jamaica has a very, well, we're predominantly descendants of African slaves. In fact, there is one community in Jamaica that has maintained, for the most part, its African heritage. In fact, it's a country within the country, the Maroons. They fought the British, they got their own independence. The only things that the police or the general government of Jamaica goes there for is for things like murder and stuff like that. But they have their own council, they have their own elections, they elect their colonel. The person who leads the village is called a colonel. And I've promised myself that, well, I've been to Kenya a couple of years ago. But I've always said I think the closest I'm going to come to understand and fully appreciate the music of Africa would be going to Maroon Town when they have their annual celebration. I've not made it yet, and I'm very close to the 70 that has been promised me. And I hope to get there before I get into overtime. But if you can tell us, what does it sound like? What is it like in a village on a Sabbath morning in the church?
So, we from the city, first of all. So there are no huts. But I will tell you, our national power supply company is going through financial difficulties. So even in the city, there comes a time where all the lights go off. But to answer your question in a less funny way, less humorous way, it's a cappella. It's seldom even instruments, seldom even less affordable, seldom even more affordable instruments. So you think that, yes, there wouldn't be a piano, but there might be a guitar, or there might be timbrels or handheld instruments, but it's often a cappella. But the harmony is tight. And you don't need good acoustics because there's something about the voice that doesn't need amplification. And it spreads beautifully. The other thing that Charles mentioned is that we have 11 official languages. You don't have to go to the huts or to the rural areas to hear that.